Welcome to the MLB Draft Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Averill, certified financial planner, certified private wealth advisor, former pro athlete, and the co-founder of AWM. I'm joined by my co-host, former Major League Baseball pitcher and certified financial planner, Travis Chick. Our goal on the MLB Draft Podcast is to provide you with the roadmap to successfully navigate the MLB Draft and becoming a professional athlete. You're going to hear from scouting directors, GMs, agents, former and current players, elite performance coaches, and of course, leading financial experts. What has traditionally seemed like a black box, we are going to bring to light the critical details you need to know to help you make the decisions that are in your best interest. So with that, let's jump right in. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. We are fired up for today's interview. We have the privilege of chatting with 2019 first overall draft pick, Adley Rutschman. In addition to obviously signing for a record amount of money, Adley was a member of the College World Series Oregon State Beavers and winner of the Golden Spikes Award. And so just excited to share a real account of what it's like to go through the draft from a player's perspective. So with that, Adley, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. We'll appreciate you doing this. I think it's one of those rare opportunities that all of us as players, it's one of those things that it's like, I wish I would have known this going through the process, and the fact that it's somewhat of a fresh memory in your mind. You know, I would love for you just to start off, sharing with us specifically if we can think about like a year before the draft. So this is, you're sitting in fall ball, about to start the college season. You have all these crazy projections out there. Like, you're the consensus supposed to be the first overall pick, yet you haven't even played an inning of college baseball in your junior year. What was going through your mind? How were you handling all of kind of the big expectations that everybody was putting on you?
There was times where it felt like a lot to handle, but the biggest thing for me was just controlling what I could control. That's the biggest thing, and just being able to close your mind off to the outside noises and distractions, and really focus on the college season that was at hand. It's amazing how much fun you can have when all those distractions of social media and stuff just kind of become irrelevant, and you get to focus on some of the best times of your life in college. Because once you get into minor league baseball, it's it's the same game, but it's different.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I love it. It's like, it's cliche and the control what you can control, but it truly is the most important thing. And it's interesting. You mentioned social media and those type of things. How did you handle, I guess, who was in your ear? Were you on social? I'd love to hear that, just as there's so many outside influences that try to come in, whether it's scouts or advisors or family or, newfound cousins and friends. How did you manage that process of who you let in your circle and whether or not you were on social?
Well, a big part of it for me was if I had a good game, I'd get on social media. But if I didn't have a good game, I definitely didn't want to be on Twitter or Instagram afterwards. I remember seeing a DM someone sent me. I think it was in the winter before the season, and someone said, I hope you tear your UCL and break your leg this season." And I sent it to all my friends. And yeah, you just got to laugh at stuff like that when it happens, and understand that. Uh, Understand that you're trying to have fun and you're trying to enjoy this. And as soon as baseball doesn't become fun, and you have to worry about that stuff, and you can't laugh at yourself when you make some dumb mistake, that's when you got to be worried. But I had family who'd talk to me. Definitely my agent was a big part of that process in helping me, and the conversations we had really helped take my focus and put it on what it needed to be. And he was always that person that would get me back on track when I needed to focus on the right thing. So that was a big part of it. But social media is just such a huge platform, so it can be tough sometimes.
Yeah. Interested to hear you talk a little bit about, you talked about how valuable your agent was through that process. obviously you being a high end prospect very publicly from your freshman year on. What was that process like? I think a lot of our players that are listening to this and families, I would say half of them have agents, half of them are still going through the process. At least for you and your family, how did you guys handle the agent process, and what type of things as a player now, specifically having gone through the draft and in pro ball, would you encourage families to really value as the important things to look at when choosing an agent?
Yeah. So first off, out of high school, I didn't have an agent. I was talking to the current agent I have now, and just going through that process as a senior in high school and comparing it to my junior year of college. Hands down, I would say having an agent not only takes the stress off the player, and also an agent can do things that you have no idea. I had no idea what I was doing. I can't talk to the Cardinals or the Orioles about how much money I want, because I really have no sense or gauge about how much I'm worth, how much I can ask for, and honestly, when it comes to the nitty gritty of it, and where you're going to get taxed, and all the just the monetary and the schooling and everything comes with a contract, I have no idea, and no player really does. So an agent just takes all that off the plate, and I think for me, it allows your focus to go back where it should, and that's just the baseball aspect. And an agent for me, they filtered all of the information and those calls from scouts as well. So it made it a lot easier.
Hey, Adley, one of the things that you said is that, you didn't really have an agent or I guess an advisor as you're kind of going through high school, and ultimately you were talking with him and selected him. But, talk about, what we see is that these high school and kids they're getting scouted so early. So talk about when that scouting process kind of happened for you. And then, you took yourself from, a high school pick to being the number one overall pick. So what was it that kind of changed that mindset? Was it a change in, skill set? Was it changing, some of the routines that you were making? But, how did you kind of go from, the high school player to the number one overall pick?
For me, it was development, and I think that's the case with a lot of players. Some kids out of high school who are super high end picks, they got that talent and they go straight out of the draft, and I think that's a good call. But for me, and there's a lot of other guys who end up going to JCs, and guys who just need time to develop their skills. They maybe have the raw tools or the power or the speed. But for me, college was the place where I really got to, take that 3 year window, make the changes I needed to. And because of that, I was able to just, raise up the draft boards and get to the spot I am now. So that to me was the biggest key.
That's awesome. One of the things that as I was kind of coming up through the system, one of the things that I noticed was about the players that really separated themselves, that, took themselves from a prospect to a legitimate major leaguer, was really that mental development. So what has changed for you going from, a college catcher where I would assume the coach called every single one of the pitches that were thrown, but what has been that mental development for you from going from college to the pro ball, where I know you're having to actually call a game?
Okay, so I think the biggest thing as far as the pitch calling goes is just getting a sense of calling a game. Calling a game is difficult, but I think the more, it's one of those things, the more you do, the better you get at it. Getting a feel for the game, and honestly, during summer ball in college, when I had the opportunity to call my own games, you found that after 3 or 4 games, you got in that rhythm and you became comfortable calling pitches. I think from a mental standpoint, the toughest development that I went through was in college during my freshman year. Pat Casey was our head coach, and he was more of a mental skills coach than anything, even though he probably wouldn't admit it. But he was a motivator, and he taught guys how to deal with fear, anxiety, and I think for you, or for most players, that's the biggest block they have in order to achieve greatness. So just getting out of your own way, and he was the guy who taught me that. But from the pitch calling standpoint, in the minor leagues, we have scouting reports on every single guy. We have their hot and cold zones. And at that point, it just becomes analytics and just memorization. So it's not as much mental, like a mental skill or mental toughness as the changes I went through in college. But it definitely was a big change.
Adley, you just finish up your first, professional spring training. and had the opportunity to be around a lot of the MLB players. From just your experience, what are some of the like key contrasts, if there are any, of just what it's like to move really being an amateur player to the professional side of baseball? What were some things that have stood out to you in your early experience?
I think a big thing, as far as my experience went, was just the energy in the games, and just the I guess attitude towards each game going in. Once I got to the minor leagues, I was with the team for, I think, at a maximum like 3 weeks this last short season, and because of that, I didn't know a lot of guys, and the friendships, the bonds weren't nearly as tight as the college bonds. You're playing every single day, as opposed to maybe 4 weeks or 4 days a week in college. So guys are grinding. It's much more of a grind, and I know you hear that a ton. But because of that, I think guys, if you hit a home run, that was the biggest difference I noticed. Someone hits a home run, the whole dugout isn't getting hyped anymore. It's not a big deal, right? You're like, did it go foul? Did I do something wrong? But it's just different because it happens more often, and I think that's, to me, the biggest difference. And I think that's why people say college is the best time of your life, or at least college baseball is the most authentic and genuine baseball there is, just because you still have the energy, and it's just about winning at that point. So yeah.
Well, there's a lot more home runs hit now, so maybe it's not as a unique time anymore in the dugout. But I'd like to shift back to a little bit to talk about more of stuff, the draft. One of the things that occurs is that these scouts, most of them are going to get the in-home meetings, and I'm sure that a lot of that is controlled over at Oregon State. But kind of talk about some of the meetings that you went through with the draft guys, and especially being the number one overall pick. I mean, there was only probably 3 teams that would really even have a chance at getting you anyway, depending on who drafted who. But how did some of those meetings go? What were some crazy questions they asked you? What information were they trying to really get out of you to make sure they were making that right pick?
Okay, first off, I really love this question because I met with all 30 teams. I met with all 30 teams in high school, and I met with all 30 teams in college. And it's amazing how unique each organization goes about their business. Some of them have eye tests, some of them don't. Some of them have mental health tests, some of them don't. Some of them have 400 questionnaires you have to fill out, and they take like 2 hours to fill out. But a lot of the things that scouts try to do, especially with the Northwest and the area scouts around the country, they just try and get a sense of who you are. Their goal is to have a relationship with you and get to know your personality. So when they get into those meetings on draft day, when they ask, when the big dogs ask them a question, they have an answer ready for them. They say, this is this guy's personality. This is what he's about. So you really want them to get a sense of who you are as a person, and what you're all about. So I think some of the crazier questions I got were, one that stands out was, do you hate to lose or do you love to win more? And that was one that really, really messed with my head a little bit, because to me, it's both. And and you got to answer authentically. You can't try and be someone you're not. So you just got to try and explain yourself the best you are. Also, one I got was rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on competitiveness, work ethic. And I remember on both of those, I said a 9. And the guy was like, a 9. And I was like, well, yeah. He's like, why not a 10? He's like, the last guy I just talked to said an 11. And I was like, well, you know what? He's lying to you. I was like, no one's an 11. If anyone says they're a 10 or an 11 or above, obviously they're satisfied, or or they don't think they can work harder. And I think that baseball is a game you can never be satisfied in. So I'm always going to say a 9. I'll never say a 10, because once I say a 10, then that's the day I'll step off the field. So yeah, those are some of the things that stood out to me. I remember the one thing I hated the most was someone tried to critique my answer in one of the meetings. They said, hey, you said this in front of me, and I'm just letting you know, if you say this in front of other people, this is what they might think. And I got really upset because it was like a personality, and more so like a character thing he said, and he wanted me to be someone I wasn't, and that really made me upset. And to me, the person he wanted me to be was more like a little bit more egotistical, and the answer was a little more egotistical than I wanted to be. And I was like, I'm never going to say that. And I hated the fact he wanted me to say that. I was like, I don't care what you want to hear. That's what this organization wants to hear. Then please skip me. You don't want me on it. Yeah. So that was my thing. But there's a lot of different personalities when it comes to organizations. So that's a big part of it, is choosing the organization that fits with your personality and your values.
Man, that last point you made, I think, is so important, not just for players to hear, but all of us, right? That a big part of who we are and the success we're going to have is based off of our character and staying authentically to who we are. And I think it's been a demonstration, at least since we've had an opportunity to work together, is watching you throughout this process was the true humility, right, of not getting too high or not getting too low. And I can say that your statement of controlling what you can control is not just some soundbite, that you did it so well. And I think a large part of that, right, has to be credit to your family, to your mom and your dad. And I'd love to hear you just share, for both the parents and the players, talking like, how did you guys maintain like a good relationship between parent and son through this process, when at the same time there is a lot of stress and anxiety and there are real business decisions to be made? Can you just share, maybe, you don't have to get into super personal details, but just what's that family dynamic like heading into the draft, and maybe some advice you could provide for the families?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things that my family preaches is, first off, trust, and then the next part, open communication. I think, and we had that throughout the draft process, and that's why I think our family is so close, is because the expectations of what we needed from each other were spoken and they were established early on. And because of that, my dad knew what I needed, and for him, that ended up being, my dad would field a lot of the calls from agents who would try and hit me up. Even though I already had an agent, agents would still try and hit me up. So my dad would field all of those calls. And so that took some stress off me. And I really appreciated that from him. I mean, my mom was just there to support. And if I told her, some days after a game, I didn't want to talk about baseball, we wouldn't talk about baseball at dinner, and whatever it may be. But having that open communication and the expectations made it so that we didn't have any of those blow up moments on each other. And we maintained, I think, a better stress level throughout the process, and we were able to enjoy the end result more, and the process leading up to it, just because we had such a clear cut line of communication throughout the whole thing. There was never any of uncertainty, and if there ever was, we were able to talk about it, and we didn't hold it back and talk behind each other's back and say, I wish they would do this. It was able to be said in a manner in which people received it well. And that's really what it comes down to, is delivering your questions and your and those tough topics in a way in which the person's going to receive it better, that doesn't escalate the situation. So
Yeah, that's man, that's I'm not too sure you gave advice to a draft kid, or like marriage advice that I could apply. So I think that was so good. Speeding up a little bit, because I think this is actually super relevant, is take us to the day of the draft, because I think for a lot of families, right, like there's this buildup of looking forward to the draft and thinking, hey, if I just get closer to draft day, I'll have a lot more certainty. I'll know what's going to happen. I find this comical, because here you are, that the industry is saying, hey, this is a consensus thing that's going to happen. I mean, while you had all of these meetings leading up to the draft, can you talk a little bit about what that actual experience was the day of? Did you know you were going to the Orioles? What was that interaction like on draft day? Yeah, it'd be great to hear that.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story, actually. I had no idea if the Orioles were going to draft me or not. And usually, from what I've heard, I remember Nick Madrigal the year before, and I don't know how much of this I can say, but Nick the year before, I think he had a good idea he was going to the White Sox. And I think he told us that a little bit beforehand. But for me, draft day, I went throughout the day and I had no idea. I was, calling my agent all day and, saying, had he heard anything? And he was asking me the same thing. We were both in the dark. But and the thing was, we were prepared for this because, we knew, I mean, someone was going to draft me, hopefully. And, I had done all I could up to that point. So there was that, that comfort in knowing that. But I didn't know until about 30 seconds before they called my name on TV. And I heard it, I got a call about a minute before, and they said the Orioles are going to draft you, and that's when I knew. I was sitting there, I was sweating for probably about an hour and a half before that meeting. All my friends had showed up, my family was in the room, and they were asking me, did I know? And I had no idea, which was kind of scary, but it built that anticipation, and I think that's definitely the way I wanted it to end up. But if I would have known beforehand, I probably couldn't have kept my mouth shut. Yeah, it's a fond memory.
So what's fascinating, and I think everybody who's in pro ball or has experienced pro ball will tell you, get prepared for that the rest of your life. There is not a lot of proactive communication and clarity of what's going on in pro ball. So it's a good training, but it was also, I think probably the very first real tangible, this is a business, and it's this really weird thing that somebody's now giving me an opportunity to fulfill, at least to start my childhood dream of playing professional baseball. And ultimately, I know for you, it's much bigger than just getting drafted, right? It's probably being one of the best in the game. But can you just talk about like how you mentally prepared for they're trying to sign you for less money than you're worth, and then your camp's trying to, and which you guys ultimately did, sign for the record amount of money that's ever been spent in the draft. So how did you handle that process of like wrapping your head around the economic side, the money side of it?
So, okay, first, are you talking about like the post draft, or?
No, so I think both. Number one, like in the process, right? I know that obviously I've got some insider information that they didn't just come out and say, "Hey, Adley, we're going to give you $8.1 million," right?
No,
That wasn't the
no.
first conversation. So walk us through what that was like, just hearing, going back and forth, and the emotion around it, and just your experience around that.
Yeah, so it was kind of a whirlwind. So I think towards the end, about a week away from the draft, we had a good idea from all three teams that they were very interested, and they thought if I was there, they were going to draft me, at least from 2 and 3. So having known that, it made it a little easier to negotiate with or to talk to the Orioles. And I mean, basically the second and third teams, they were much more clear with what they were willing to do and what they wanted to. Basically, yeah, they were very clear about what they were willing to do for me, and so that made it easier for us to negotiate with the top, with the Orioles. How much of this can I say? Because I feel like.
No, it's great. And I don't think the numbers don't matter. I think
Okay.
just even what you shared right there is super helpful, right? Of just going, because this is real live experience, that as players and families are listening to this, to go, you know what? Here's Adley, who really from a consensus year standpoint, everybody had kind of assumed like this was a done deal. It was so clear. But what I'm hearing from you is, you know what? Every professional team's different. Some of them hold their cards very close to their chest. And even on draft day with 5 minutes left on the clock, they might find themselves in a situation with very little information. And what I've heard from you is it really came down to you, your parents, and your agent. Your camp was very prepared ahead of time so that it didn't become emotional. You guys had calm, cool, collected decision making, that it was like, hey, you know what? We know what we're trying to do. If a certain organization doesn't want to meet that, that's okay. We'll move on to the next. And I think is that fair to say?
That's exactly right. I think, yeah, we knew it. We talked about this for probably a month before, and at least a week before, we had exact numbers about what we wanted. And because of that, when we got the calls, the answers were already there, and we said, this is what we want. This is what we need. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. We'll go to the next person. And there's a strategy to it, and there's definitely some risk involved. And so we had to talk about what kind of risk we were willing to take beforehand, and knowing that some of the teams might not go for it. And because of that, I think we played it pretty conservatively, but at the same time, we definitely took some risks, especially with the Orioles. But it ended out good for us, and I think that's why it went so late too, is because we were ambitious. And yeah, but I think knowing that we had that set in stone beforehand definitely made it easier. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious that you guys were extremely proactive in planning for that. One of the things that we hear so often, obviously not from you through this, is that a financial team is not somebody that you necessarily need to consult with before the draft. We can handle that. We'll wait. What are some? It sounds like you had a pretty good idea financially. What are some of the things that you guys, not numbers specific, but kind of walk us through that decision, because that's really the decision that all these kids are out there listening to, thinking through of, okay, what is it going to take for me to actually sign? What are they going to start asking me, how much money I'm going to take? Like, kind of walk us through that mindset of how you came to those numbers.
Well, first off, I think meeting with agents, meeting with financial advisors was a huge part of it, because those don't cost anything. And that's just valuable information for both ends. And that, like I said earlier, the communication is just key. And there's a lot of things that I don't know that I was very enlightened to hear from my agent and financial advisors. And that happened for me before my junior year of college in the winter. And those conversations started. So that's how I was able to get a better grasp and a better jump on things by doing that. But as far as coming up with the numbers, that was just a lot of talks with family mostly, and then just talking with financial advisors about how those numbers looked, and mostly just deferring to them as far as what they thought was the best option, because I didn't know. But fortunately for me, I picked extremely well, and we were able to come to solid agreements on both ends, and really find out what we wanted, and our values ended up aligning as well, which was nice.
I think it's great advice. It's funny, even through, my own playing career, and this is like, I've never heard it so simplicity put, of like, those meetings don't cost anything. Like, who doesn't want free, valuable information that's going to help my career? I think it's so blatant and simple, which is good. So you do all of the proper planning, obviously, because of who you are, where you're picked, the preparation, the structure of your signing bonus in the most tax advantage way. You moved residency, you actually did everything properly. You've put yourself in this situation where you've now maximized this really insane amount of money for a young person. You literally went from like, hey, I've got to ask mom and dad for some lunch money, to now being independently wealthy. And I know from a humility standpoint, you don't see yourself as wealthy, but can you just share what's the right mentality or framework that you would encourage young players, that when you go from like having no money to now all of a sudden you're a signing bonus baby, like how have you handled that mentally, and what's some advice you would provide for these players that are going to walk into a significant amount of money?
Okay, so I like this question too, because I got a lot of advice on this, and a lot of this is not coming from my personal knowledge. But the biggest advice I got was treat yourself to something nice, get yourself that gift. And for me, I got a car, and it wasn't a ridiculous car either. It wasn't a $200,000 R8 or something ridiculous. I got a car that for me is practical. It's definitely, like, I enjoy driving the car. It's a nicer car, but it's nothing ridiculous. And that was my one gift. And I think the biggest thing besides that is just not changing your habits as far as your spending goes to a ridiculous standpoint. I buy the same type of clothes that I did now. I didn't buy a $500,000 gold chain. I have endorsement, or not endorsement deals. I have deals with, I'm signed with Nike, and so I get some merchandise through them, and that doesn't cost me anything. And I think as far as like food goes, that's been the biggest thing for me that has gotten a little bit nicer. But I don't go to steakhouse dinners every night. I just get, I get nicer food on a consistent basis from the store, or, instead of going to McDonald's, I don't have to go to McDonald's anymore. I can go to an Italian place and get a nice chicken dinner or whatever it is, but not changing those spending habits from what you were to, getting Gucci and Versace stuff. So if you don't need it, I mean, some people need that, but for me, I'm comfortable sitting in my Nike sweats. So
yeah, I think it's pretty obvious, listening to this call. I'm sure every single scout that came in and sat down were like, man, this guy is an elite human being. And, just everything that you've said today just kind of exudes that easy confidence that you have in yourself. And then that easy track record of being able to be successful, I think is going to play dividends for you in the future. So, I think it's really interesting, because one of the things that we talk about with so many of our guys is, taking that money and using it to make your situation the best it can be in the big leagues, or, for the big leagues. And so, one of the things that, you hit on was meals, thinking through everything that you do in terms of how to be a professional, right? Like taking your mind on, how you're sharpening your mind, how you're making sure that the food that you put in your body is the best it can be. Who are you surrounding yourself with to create that pros mindset? I remember one of the ways that was described back when I was playing was, you always wanted to be what's called a pros pro. And I think everything that you've shared on this call today is you being that pros pro. So I think this is fantastic information to all these players to hear.
Yeah. Okay. One more thing. I totally spaced on this, but what I was trying to get at was just more alluding to the fact of, you have this money, and the money, like what I'm willing to spend it on is things that are going to help me get to where I want to be in my career. Things like I was saying, meals, that's going to help me, that's going to fuel my body for workouts. I'm willing to spend, $400 on a nice, hypervolt, something that's going to be there for my therapy for post workout. I'm willing to, stuff like that, stuff that's going to help forward your career. But like the material things is really what I'm talking about, as far as the things that I would not change my spending on, would not change that spending bracket. So, but anything that's going to help you forward your career, anything that's going to make it easier to get to where you want to be in your career, that's what that money to me is for. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah, and I think that's just a great reemphasis there, Adley, of something that you've laid out over and over again in this conversation. Is you have a very defined picture of what you want to accomplish, and I think unfortunately a lot of times we do see over the years of a lot of times people are so focused of only getting to the draft, and it's like, now I get drafted, I've got some money, I buy a car, and I act as if I've made it. But making sure you always keep goals in front of you, staying humble, staying hungry, really focused on, hey, I haven't arrived yet, right? Where, like you said, essentially I won't be a 10 until they rip the jersey off of my back and my career's over. And so I think that's obviously has served you well. It's going to continue to serve you well. And so we want to be sensitive to your time. This has been, I know, a lot of fun for us, and I know will be very impactful for these families. But before we go, kind of any last words that, if you're sitting down, if you were sitting down with a player who's going to be a consensus, probably top draft pick, they're going to be going pro the next year, like, what are the final words that, if they said, hey, Adley, what's one or two pieces of advice that you would give me as I head into this draft, what would you tell them?
First off, definitely focus on the team and being present every single day at practice and in the games, because that's where most of the enjoyment comes from. And I think when you have that perspective of the here and now, and having that, I guess, selfless outlook as much as you can on just helping out your teammates and helping forward their progress, I think you'll find that having that mentality, you yourself will play better. You're not going to be focused on your results, and have a process for how you go about your business. Have a don't be results oriented. Focus on the process and being the best you can every day, getting the most out of every day, so that as you go throughout the season, one, you have no regrets. Two, you're enjoying your time, and baseball's still going to be fun, and it's going to be probably some of the best times you've ever had in your life. And then, I mean, I think I think that should take care of, everything that it needs to. If you go about your business every single day trying to get better, that's all you can ask of yourself, and that's all you can do. And any results that come about from that are just, that's the result of your work, and that's it. So that's basically all I have. But definitely try to enjoy the game as much as you can, during this season. So that's it.
Incredible words of wisdom from Adley Rutschman. Adley, so much thanks for being on the podcast, and wish you the best of luck in the upcoming season. And for all the listeners out there, we appreciate your guys' time. We do this hopefully to provide value for all of the families out there. Of course, if you have any questions for us or Adley, we'd love to hear from you. All of our contact information is in the show notes. And until next time, stay humble, stay hungry, and exhaust the moment.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's show. We hope that you enjoyed it. Our goal here with the MLB Draft Podcast is to make this the go-to resource for all families and athletes looking to take their career to the next level. And so this show really is all about you, and we would love to hear from you. Are there any questions you have, topics that you would love for us to cover? Please do reach out. You can shoot us an email at eric@athletewealth.com or travis@athletewealth.com. Of course, you can find us on social. We're on all the major platforms at Athlete Wealth. And if you'd like to set up a phone call with us, you can reach us by going online to athletewealth.com, and you'll see right at the top of the page there's a button where you can schedule a call directly with us. And so we would love to hear from you. And until next time, stay focused, stay hungry, and be a pro.